So in this part of the video we're going to add some of the functionality in iOS. So we've only really added stuff to handle the spinners or the picker choices. Now we're going to add some more of the functionality. So we're going to start by adding some of the help functions. These are going to be the same functions that we saw in Android. So a lot of them I'm just going to copy and paste over and then modify to fit the iOS version. And then we're also going to copy the choose calculation function. That should be copy, not cope. So we're going to copy that over, and I'm just going to explain again exactly what it's doing. So most of these, for most of the rest of this tutorial, I'm just going to copy and paste the code over from Android and then modify it and then explain to you exactly what it's doing, because it's a lot faster than typing it all out again. And yeah, so it's already a long tutorial and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time repeating myself. Alright, so now we've got the pickers completely sorted out. I know it's a really long process to get those implemented and actually handled properly. So we created the class, then we created a couple new instances, and then we added the handlers. So now let's add some more functionality. A lot of this I'm just going to again copy and paste over from the Android version. So I'm just going to go into main activity.cs. This is the Android stuff here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll to the bottom, and there's a couple of helper functions that I'm just going to basically copy and paste over. So this is going to be the print results, the pass variables, and the set hints. I'm just going to copy these three. So Command C, and I'm going to go to the viewcontroller.cs, and I'm going to paste them at the bottom just before the variable picker class. Okay, so I'm going to paste them there. And as we can see, we get some red lines here, and that's because the names have changed. So let's first take a look at our set hints function. So if you remember, set hints was just basically changing the placeholders in these fields, or the hints, and it was just changing them to the appropriate variables, and it was just changing the text fields to be blank, and it was returning this variable which we'll take in as combined string. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to change these names. Actually, the first thing will be to change the name of the function. So this is going to be set placeholder now. And the reason, because if we go to main.storyboard, these hints are actually called placeholders and not hints. Okay, so back to viewcontroller.cs, we're going to change this one to txt field 1. And this one's going to be txt field 2 and txt field 3, and we're going to call .placeholder on each of these. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it, and then I'm just going to change the same down here. So these are just calling the names that we assigned in iOS versus in Android. So it's doing exactly the same thing. It's changing the placeholders to contain these variables. So for example, if we're missing final velocity, it might change it to initial velocity, acceleration, and time, and then the user would know where to input which type of variable. Okay, and then we're changing the text to blank, and then we're returning that. So now we have our set placeholder function set up. It's doing exactly the same thing as it was in Android. So again, setting the placeholders and emptying the text fields, and then returning a string, which is going to be the three variables combined. Now pass variable is just going to take in the user input, and it's going to change them to doubles and then store them in these three variables. Okay, so we've seen functions that do this kind of thing before. It's just going to take in the text from, in this case, txt field 1, and it's going to change to a double and store it in variable 1. Okay, so this will allow us to perform calculations. So this one, I'm just going to change to field 2 and then to field 3. Okay, so again, pass variables, just changing the input field is taking in the input from the user, change them to doubles so that we can use them in calculations. Print results is going to be the next thing we change. So this is no longer answer text, this is lbl answer text.text, and the rest is fine to keep because we're still going to take the final answer, change it to a string, and add the units onto the end of it, and then assign it to this text here, which is going to be the answer text. Okay, So just going to go to view controller.cs and save it again. And then we are going to add in some of the other functions. Okay? So now we've got all these helper functions. We're going to add some more functions here. I'm going to go to main.storyboard, or the main activity.cs I mean, and we're just going to copy some of these over. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything. I'm going to take this choose calculation function. I'm going to copy this. Going to go to the view controller.cs and I'm going to paste it. And I know we haven't implemented these methods yet, but we will in just a minute. In fact, we'll do that in the next part because I don't want to spring everything on you at once. So we're just going to save it and I'm going to explain what's going on. Oh, and then we're going to uncomment these. So this function now, if you recall from Android, and even if you don't, I'll explain anyway. So it's going to take in a string, which is a calculation, and that's equal to whatever we chose from the calculation picker. So for example, let's say we chose, and in fact I'll explain right from the get-go what's happening with the handlers. So in our first picker, we chose a variable to calculate, and let's say we chose final velocity. Okay, then that becomes our variable to calculate, and this is it. Then we choose from the calculation picker. So we know this is the missing variable, but there's a few different calculations we could choose from. So let's pick this one. And that becomes our choose calculation. So we pass that into here. We pass this calculation in. And based on which variable to calculate we have, which in this case was the final velocity, it will choose the appropriate calculation. In this case, it would choose the final velocity calculation and it would pass in this one that we chose here. So then we can manipulate it accordingly. In our case, we'd just simply enter these in. However, if it was this one that we passed in, then there would be a lot of manipulation. We'd have to change this equation around quite a bit to find out what final velocity is. Okay, so that's all this function is doing, is helping us to select a calculation. The handlers just kind of allow us to choose that by assigning variables. And just to recap, the print results is just going to change the final label text to contain our final results plus units. The set placeholder is just taking in whichever placeholders we assign it, or whichever three variables we assign it, and setting the placeholders to be equal to those variables. And it's changing the text fields to be blank, and it's going to return a string, which is basically just the three variables combined. Okay, so that's the first part of the calculations, and we'll take a look at the second part in this next part coming up here. Alright, so in this part we added some of the actual functionality in iOS. So what we did is we copied the helper functions from the Android portion as well as the choose calculation function. So these were three functions. There was the set hints, or set that we changed to set placeholder function. There was the print function, and there was the pass variables function. So set placeholders literally just set the placeholder text and change the text to blank and returned a string. The print variables just kind of change the final label to contain our answer. And the pass variables just takes in the user input, converts them to doubles so that we can use them in calculations. And we also did the choose calculation function, which will help us to determine which calculation to use. So by now you should understand what the helper functions are doing in the grand scheme of things and why they're useful, and have some idea of the rest of the functionality we're going to implement.